promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and 1 o'clock in Lagos. Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and worldwide on wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink, and here are the top stories. Guinea-Bissau to elect members of parliament for the second time in a year and a half. CSOs, pressure groups across Africa call for solidarity following increasing shrinking civic space.
The Joint Committee having considered and scrutinized.
I think there is the need to bring everyone together, strategize by focusing on the strength of each organization.
But when you go to autocratic environment, the first line of attack or reprisal is civil society.
Liberian President Boakai announces 40% cut in his salary in fulfillment of campaign promise. And Select Committee on Health and Gender recommends Parliament upholds law criminalizing FGM in the Gambia.
The Joint Committee having considered and scrutinized the bill and had various experts and opinions hereby recommends as follows: that the Women Amendment Act 2015 be maintained to prohibit female circumcision in all forms, whether genital mutilation or cutting in the Gambia.
Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Imo Edit with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining us and a warm welcome to our listeners in the Gambia, Ghana, Liberia and Sierra Leone. Well, let's begin this afternoon in Guinea-Bissau, where legislative elections have been scheduled for November 24, 2024. The country's president, Umaro Sissoco Embalo, made the announcement on Monday while addressing the press. This will be the second time in a year and a half that Bissau Guineans will elect their members of parliament. Well, recall that the president dissolved the National Assembly, which was then dominated by the opposition in December 2023, following events that he describes as an attempted coup d'etat. Well, in Mali, the court has ordered for the arrest of Mohamed Ali Bateli, a former Minister of Justice, on Monday. Bateli, a member of the Malian Bar, has been in police custody since last Friday after he was arrested on June 20 for participating in a clandestine meeting while political activities were suspended in the country. He was, however, released a few hours later due to his status as a lawyer. Augustine Colley gives us more details in this report.
Mohamed Ali Batli appeared before the court on this Monday after spending the weekend in police custody at the Judicial Investigation Brigade. After his hearing, he was placed on arrest at the Central Prison in Bamako. The courts accuse him of attempted destabilization, endangering state security and disturbing public order. His arrest adds to 10 other politicians who have also been thrown in prison for similar reasons in the country recently. Batli's arrest is linked to a meeting held in the house of another politician. According to the Malian authorities, this was a violation of the presidential decree suspending the activities of political parties and associations. Several political actors and civil society organizations have condemned this action by the state, indicating that the arrests muzzle the opposition and limit freedom of expression. They have since demanded the outright dropping of the charges against those arrested. It is worth mentioning that all those who were detained were transferred to various prisons across the country, with the dates of their trials not been set.
Augustine Colley reporting there. That report was actually filed by a correspondent in Bamako, Aliou Cham. Now, back here in Senegal, the apprehension about the future of democracy is becoming more widespread beyond the sub-region, following the flagrant disregard for democratic principles and the rule of law and the deteriorating socio-economic conditions in democratic communities. Since Monday, over 30 leaders and representatives from civil society organizations, pressure groups, international donors from across Africa have been meeting in Dakar to voice concerns and build a solidarity movement for democratic renewal in Africa. For these African CSOs and pressure groups, the changing dynamics of democracy calls for a new framework for solidarity, for social movement and civic leaders. Chez completes the story.
The military coups in Niger and Gabon in 2023 sharpened the world's focus on the fragility of rule of law in Africa. There have been 9 successful military coups on the continent since 2020, alongside at least the same number of failed attempts. These developments, according to civil society actors, have led to an era of increasing political repression and socio-political transitions, prompting the need for social movements to adapt, collaborate, and innovate. Samson Itodo is the executive director of Yaga Africa, and Aisha Dabo, co-founder, Affectivists, are the organizers of the Solidarity Conference.
So gone are those days when only social movements engage. There needs to build alliances with political parties who are committed to certain values. But also internationalizing the struggles helps social movements build resilience in those countries, because when you express mutual support, you're able to amplify, the causes and the struggles in a way that it triggers action.
It's important to identify, we cannot all agree on everything.
Definitely.
But at least there is one goal on which we would all agree. And even if it's just one, I think there is the need to bring everyone together, strategize by focusing on the strength of each organization.
Speaking separately, Paul Osekufo, coordinator of Wadimos Network, and Cynthia Mbamalu, director of programs for Yaga Africa, highlighted the importance of solidarity and the role on changing governance, especially in coup states where the civic space is shrinking.
The environment that we are dealing with have different governance subtypes. We have democracies and you have autocracies. For us, building solidarity in a relatively democratic environment is not that challenging. There are difficulties, there are pushback, but you are able to surmount them. The case of Senegal, which is a democracy, we were able to mobilize. But when you go to autocratic environment, the first line of attack or reprisal is civil society, is media, and even the civic space, online or offline.
I was saying, what would solidarity look like for coming from Nigeria for Togo? But the thing is, there were very little conversations around Togo, even in the media spaces, even on social media. So you don't even know that there is some protest and resistance going on within that country, especially because it's seen as a constitutional democracy, even though it's autocratic.
The conference, which continues on Tuesday, aims to build and strengthen solidarity among African social movements, explore new forms of civic activism, and address the challenges of managing transitions.
HTC reporting there.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Crossing over now to Ghana as the election date draws near, the special representative of the Secretary General and head of the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, UNOWAS, Leonardo Santos Simao, concluded a 2-day pre-election visit. His visit also involved a meeting with Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo as they discussed plans towards the December polls. Abdullah Hassan completes the story.
The objective of the visit was to engage with the authorities in Ghana and other stakeholders on the electoral process in order to promote peaceful, transparent, credible, and inclusive general elections scheduled for December 7, 2024. The special representative of the United Nations, Leonardo Santos Simao, also met with Ghana's president, where they shared notes on how to ensure the pending elections are free and fair. Following that, Santos Simao also met with the Minister of National Security, Albert Kandapa, as well as the Minister of Interior, Henry Kwate, the Commissioner of the Electoral Commission of Ghana, Jean Mensah, members of the Board of Directors of the National Peace Council, representatives of the National Commission for Civic Education, the National Media Commission, and the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice. Simao lauded Ghana for the roles it plays in consolidating peace and security in the sub-region, while stressing the importance of strengthening a collective approach to meeting security challenges. He further called for the promotion of a conducive environment for all, ensuring that the country maintains its enviable democratic history in the sub-region and on the continent by coming out of the December polls with another successful, peaceful, transparent, credible, and open elections.
Abdullah Hassan reporting there. Still in Ghana, the majority members of parliament have jumped to the defense of Chief Justice Gertrude Araba Tokono over her request for the appointment of 5 additional justices to the Supreme Court. In a letter to President Nana Akufo-Addo, The CJ cited the huge workload of the apex court of the land as basis for her request. Some legal brains have questioned the constitutionality of the move by the Chief Justice, with the opposition NDC accusing the president of packing the court with too many judges. But addressing the media, Majority Leader in Parliament Alexander Afenyo-Makin argued the Chief Justice has not breached any law in her recommendation.
In the United States, the Federal Supreme Court receives between 5,000 to 7,000 new cases each term, that's each legal year. However, the court only grants 80 cases for plenary review with viva voce arguments, and it usually disposes of around 100 or more cases without plenary review. Isn't it strange? Is that what is happening in Ghana? No. In Ghana, you cannot do that. A judge, the Chief Justice, is compelled to empanel once the matter comes before the court. The registrar transmits a process, it has to be empaneled. And that is why, in the wisdom of our founders of the 92 Constitution, they made provision for a minimum. So we say with emphasis that the Chief Justice hasn't done anything illegal, immoral, nor unconstitutional in respect of her recommendation for the need to increase the number of justices at the Supreme Court. Now, perhaps I may have to bring in our neighbors, Nigeria. Nigeria is also a federal state. Recently, it increased its federal Supreme Court bench, the number, to 24 because of issues similar to what has warranted the recommendation of our Chief Justice. And they are fine with it. Now, in our country, Supreme Court, no less than 700 cases are received each year. And what we think must catch the attention of those who are opposed to this is that, unlike the U.S., judges exercise discretion to hear some of the cases is received, provided they meet their threshold.
Alexander Afenyo-Makin is Ghana's majority leader in Parliament. Well, let's cross over to Liberia, where in fulfillment of his 2023 campaign promise, President Joseph Boakai has announced a 40% cut in his salary. Boakai currently earns a gross salary of about $22,000 United States dollars per month, including several other benefits. WDL's Monrovia correspondent Darlington Popper report.
So far, the president's annual budget is more than $2.29 million United States dollars, and President Boakai believes the 40% reduction will help address some of the constraints facing the nation and its people. Making a pronouncement, Presidential Press Secretary Kula Fofana said the move is the president's own way of helping to address the economic constraints facing the nation.
That cut will go to the Liberian people. And so with the specifics as to particularly who it will go to, what will be set up, the management of it, will it go to the central government or will it go to a specific project and all of that. But I can tell you that it will go to the Liberian people. And as soon as we finalize all of the different specifics on details and whatnot, again, I will be the first person to inform you that, hey.
Despite the pronouncement, Makengba Keita, an opposition member, feels the president's pronouncement is a mere talk that will not be actualized.
It's just a mere joke. To boost his morale to say the president is cutting down his salary. Will be a help to civil serving? First of all, you got to see all those things. Cutting down salary is just a mere joke. The president is saying, who knows if it will happen. If he's saying you want to cut down his salary, there should be a budget harmonization within this office. We can say you're cutting down salary, then there is no budget harmonization. There is nothing to show where is this salary cutting from, how will it be used. We don't know.
However, Deputy Information Minister Daniel Sano says savings from the president's 40% cut will go towards addressing the nation's priority projects.
The president has said that he will not be indifferent to the suffering of the Liberian people. He will not enjoy luxury and largesse while the people he serves struggle. Somebody asking me, where would the 40% go? Of course, it goes back to government covers. Once the president decides to reduce his salary by 40%, the appropriate authority at the Ministry of Finance will act, working in concert with the Ministry of State to ensure that the president's salary is reduced by 40%.
Following this, Financial Express are calling on the president to publicly instruct the Ministry of Finance to effect this salary cut. For Newslink on West Africa Democrats Radio, I'm Darlington Popper in Monrovia.
In Burkina Faso, trade union centers are outraged by the current state of press freedom and the right to information. They say they see that the war against terrorism is being put forward as a pretext for taking repressive measures against the press and citizens. The trade union centers are therefore calling for a surge and denouncing attacks on press freedom and the right to information. Details with Nadide today.
In a declaration published on Monday, July 8, the Central Trade Unions and Independent Unions reported recent attacks on press freedom. They mentioned the kidnapping of journalist Atiana Ulon, publishing director of the investigative newspaper L'Événement, on June 24 at 5 a.m. They also noted the 1-month suspension of the publication of L'Événement by the Superior Council of Communication, CSC, on June 20 this year. On the same day, the CSC suspended the 7 Infos program on BF1 television for 2 weeks, followed by the kidnapping of Kalifara Seri, one of the panelists on the program. A few days later, hundreds of supporters of those in power gathered at the headquarters of BF1 television to issue threats regarding some of its programs and guests. Since June 29, the probable kidnapping of Adama Bayala, a columnist of the Press Echo program on the same television, BF1, has also been noted. The trade union centers observed that repressive measures against the press and citizens are being justified by the context of the war against terrorism. They expressed their solidarity with the media community and denounced the attacks on the freedom of journalists and citizens.
Nadide Tete voiced that report filed by our Ouagadougou correspondent Martin Kaba. You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Guinea-Bissau to elect members of parliament for the second time in a year and a half. CSOs, pressure groups across Africa called for solidarity following increasing shrinking civic space. Liberian President Boakai announces 40% cut in his salary in fulfillment of campaign promise. And still ahead in the news, Select Committee on Health and Gender recommends Parliament oppose law criminalizing FGM in the Gambia. We will have the press review, our guest interview segment, and sports news. Please stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
Well, don't forget you can listen to us live on wadr.org, YouTube, and Facebook. And to some cheery news from the Gambia, as the country's National Assembly Select Committee on Health and Gender has recommended that the Parliament oppose the existing law criminalizing female genital mutilation FGM. This recommendation comes amidst ongoing debates about the law's impact and enforcement, and the member for Foni Kansala Al-Mami Giba introduced a private member bill which seeks to repeal the law. Our Banjo correspondent Zaglu Janko completes the story.
The committee's report emphasizes the significant health risk and human rights violations associated with FGM. It highlights the need to protect girls and women from what it described as a harmful practice, adding it can lead to severe medical complications, including infections, chronic pain, and complications during childbirth. Amadou Kamara is the National Assembly member for Nyanija and the co-chair of the Select Committee on Gender and Health.
The Joint Committee, having considered and scrutinized the bill and had various experts and opinions, hereby recommends as follows: that the Women Amendment Act 2015 be maintained to prohibit female circumcision in all forms, whether genital mutilation or cutting in the Gambia. Repealing the ban on FGMC would expose women and girls to severe health risks and violate their rights to physical and mental well-being.
The committee argues that maintaining the law is essential for safeguarding the health and rights of Gambian women and girls. However, the recommendation faced significant opposition from other lawmakers during parliamentary debates. Critics argue that the law criminalizing FGM infringes on cultural and religious rights. Almami Jibahu tabled the private member bill to repeal the anti-FGM law was least pleased with the committee's recommendations.
I am sorry to inform this committee, the two joint committees, that they have betrayed the trust of Muslims. I strongly stand. As per the various consultation stakeholders have done, I have seen biases that it doesn't reflect the wish and aspiration of the Gambian people. The chair of the committee member keep emphasizing FGM. If I may cite, Honorable Speaker, the act that we are working to repeal, it says prohibition of female circumcision. We are here to correct the wrongs. Be brave enough to speak the truth.
Meanwhile, the private member bill seeking to repeal the anti-FGM law will be tabled for consideration to allow members to scrutinize each clause on 16 July 2024. For those Lincoln West African Democrats Radio, I'm Sankuli Jenko reporting from Banjul.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Well, let's join Darlington Popper in Monrovia for the newspaper review.
For today's edition of Press Review, we have the Heritage newspaper, the Hot Pepper newspaper, and the Independent newspaper. We begin the review process with the Heritage newspaper. Report: Finance Minister resigns. We see the photograph of Buema Kamara, Finance Minister, on the front page of the Heritage newspaper. We will leave it right there. Stay on the front page of the Heritage newspaper. Liberia Permanent Representative to IMO presents letter of credence. On the back page of this Heritage newspaper, Liberians welcome the arrival of F-moving equipment, but what? Try to get his copy of this paper and read more. In Grand Bassa, Maigibi counties, LRA real estate expansion project nests over 20,000 registered properties. Human rights group challenges President Bouakar's legal officers with prohibition in RNACR crisis. From the Heritage newspaper, the Hot Pepper newspaper is next for review. As UP government strangulates rice importers, Commerce Minister blunders. We see the photograph of Amimoda, Minister of Commerce, on the front page of the Hot Pepper newspaper. Finance Minister Buema Kamara quits, and we see the photograph of Finance and Development Planning Minister Buema Kamara. On the back page of the Hot Pepper newspaper, President Bouakar makes case for Liberia at 65th ECOWAS Summit. Liberian medical doctor hails AML Yekepa Hospital facility. Dr. Mohammed Freeman, a dedicated medical professional assigned at the Asarometa Yekepa Hospital, recently shared lights on the healthcare services provided by the Asarometa Liberia Yekepa Hospital. Speaking to journalists over the weekend, Dr. Freeman dispelled misinformation about the hospital's accessibility and louder its medical care for both employees and the general public. We will leave it right there. Liberia's permanent representative to IMO presents letter of credence. From the Hot Pepper newspaper, our last stop for today's edition is the Independent newspaper. For 2 years, NAFA fails to submit financial report as national budget faces significant financial risks. We see the photograph of Emma Glasgow, the head of the National Fisheries and Aquaculture Authority. Ambassador Rabok Bade presents letter of credence to IMO. On the back page of the Independent newspaper, Bility wants legislature to X-ray yellow machines deal. We will leave it right there. In Grand Bassa, Maigibi counties, LRA real estate expansion project nests over 20,000 registered properties. On that note, that is how I would love to conclude today's edition of Press Review. But before we go, these are the newspapers we actually followed on today's edition. We followed the Heritage newspaper, the Hot Pepper newspaper, and the Independent newspaper was our last stop. On that note, thank you so much for following, and bye-bye.
Many thanks, Darlington Popper there with the newspaper review.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
In this segment, we will focus on the call by civil society organizations in Africa in strengthening solidarity. Stakeholders in the civic space have been deliberating in Dakar on the concerns of a shrinking civic and media space, arguing that this perilous time requires a new framework for solidarity for social movement and civic leaders. WDL caught up with Aisha Dabo, co-founder of Activists and co-organizer of the Solidarity Conference.
It's important to identify, we cannot all agree on everything.
Definitely.
But at least there is one goal on which we would all agree. And even if it's just one, I think there is the need to bring everyone together and, strategize by focusing on the strength of each organization to be able to mobilize the people, to raise awareness, but also to, in a case of election, because usually when we have problems in African democracy, it's because there's election that's, it's in the mix of the discussion. Have civic education on the basics of human rights, but also the basics of voters as a citizen, actually, what's expected of them. So identifying a common cause and focus on what brings us together than focusing more on what divides us or what are the differences we have.
There was a concern mentioned earlier about the shrinking civic space in Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso. In fact, this island state, we're seeing all of that. And your colleagues that are there seems to be shut out of the reality. Even we as journalists, we find it very difficult to even reach out to some of them. How can we break those barriers?
In the past, when the region actually is faced with such issues, you would always have, all the mobilization activities in another country. I can give the example of, the Gambia, on the Jammeh, and most of the activities were happening in Senegal. But right now, we have junta leaders actually who, when there's some people protesting in a given country on issues that have to do with that country, they'll naturally go and target the citizens of the country where the protest happened. So it makes it more difficult. One of the ways that was used, and I think this is a strategy that can also be used, what we mostly keep in mind, and civil society, and especially working on human rights around these issues, is making sure that you don't do any harm or you don't, worsen the situation on the ground.
Are there also concerns about CSOs and pressure groups that seem to be on divided lines now? We know some are supporting, some are pro-government, pro-military, and the others are saying, no, we need to return back, to proper democracy. How do you manage these issues?
It's sometimes very difficult, actually, to have those conversations when you don't have people. We should not, and I think also Dionisio from Cape Verde, we should not see ourselves as us against them. It's not about that. It's us. And continuous discussion, however difficult it should be, should continue happening.
Aisha Dabo is a co-founder and coordinator of Africtivists. And in sport brief, we start off in tennis. World number 2 Coco Gauff was sent crashing out of the Wimbledon by American compatriot Emma Navarro on Sunday as Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner were firmly locked on an All-England Club semi-final collision course. Gauff's 6-4, 6-3 fourth round defeat means that only 2 of the top 10 women's seeds are left in the tournament. Elsewhere, unheralded Lulu Son became the first New Zealand woman to reach the last 8 at Wimbledon, while Madison Keys quit her last 16 clash in floods of tears. And in football, the Euro 2024 has reached the semi-final stage and is getting ready for 2 heavyweight ties as France takes on Spain and England meet the Netherlands. And we've come to the end of this edition of News Link on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudaju for the technical assistance. Let's keep the conversation coming on all of our platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, at WADR News, and Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio, English service. I am Imo Edet. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via